This is the story of how the indie game Archvale was made from a bedroom. I talked to the creator and what I learned was fantastic. Both Archvale as well as this video are possible thanks to GameMaker, so once you're ready to start making your own awesome games, check out the link in the description. My name's Jonas and my guest today is the one and only IDoZ. So what would we say was the biggest struggle you had to overcome when making Archvale?
The hardest thing about making Archvale and making it for so long was that by the end of development, I basically hated the game. I could no longer see the parts of the game that were good. It was to a point where I was like, is this, like, when someone would play it, I was surprised that they were having any fun. It's like, is this actually fun? This was really hard for me because I had to keep plowing on with making content whilst at the same time feeling like, is this even like a particularly good game? And obviously you get positive feedback from people, but it's very easy to trick yourself into thinking, well, these people don't want to hurt your feelings. They're just being nice. We had QA testers who, they're being paid. So they're probably not going to say, oh, this is rubbish. Like, they'll report the problems to you. But at the end of the day, they're like, yeah, it was really fun, though. We had lots of fun playing it. It's like, well, they're not going to say they didn't.
Yeah.
And your friends aren't going to say, this game you've been working on for years, I don't like it. It's not fun. So it becomes very easy to convince yourself that it's no good. And yeah, a massive part of that is just how much playtesting I was doing, just playing the game over and over and over all day, every day. And it's like, Archvale is a game that's designed to be played through once or twice, maybe 8 to 16 hours. And I've got something like 1,000 hours in it. And it's like, it's unreasonable to expect me to still be having fun with this 8-hour-long game when I've played thousands of hours of it. But it was so hard to like just get to work every day thinking I hate this game. I'm sick of it. When we got closer to the end of development, we started getting some reviews in and stuff, and I was so amazed that the reviews were as positive as they were. We got one that was a 5 out of 5, and we got loads of 9 out of 10s, and it's like, I'm clearly missing something. I'm clearly wrong. And a big thing about making a big game is you won't ever play the game fully, like from start to finish. You're working on these tiny little chunks of game. And so when we were getting to the end and I actually started playing the whole game all the way through, suddenly these systems started to click, It's like, suddenly I care about the gold I'm getting because I'm not just playing for 10 minutes, I'm playing the whole thing. I want the money so I can buy the upgrades. And buying the upgrades, it's like, now I've got this thing for the rest of the game. And it's like, actually, this is quite good. I'm having fun now. But yeah, it was, when I was just on that content grind, it was tough. I was really feeling like, this isn't very good. And I really started thinking, so even though we had those nice reviews, like maybe they were just wrong. People might hate it, but no, I was wrong, thankfully.
Okay, so you'd say the biggest thing was a mental barrier somewhere in the middle of development where you had to push through, basically.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people probably experience this because I think a lot of indie developers are like I was before this game, where you make a game and then you think, actually, I want to make this other game. And then you just go and make something else. When it stops being fun, you go and make something else. Whereas we had to push through this. So
yeah, that's a phase in almost any game project where doubt starts creeping in and you're like, oh, should I make something else maybe?
Yeah.
And yeah, if you quit every time that happens, then you're never gonna make a finished game. Luckily, it seems like you realized that, and I feel like also working in a team usually helps with that, because
it does. Yes,
the chance that both are dwelling in doubt at the same time is a little bit lower.
Yes, yeah.
I'd say. And you can kind of encourage each other to keep going.
For sure, yeah, and that helped a lot.
But didn't you have those discouraging moments as well, where you were like, you looked at the game a year ago and you're like, that looks kind of similar to how it looks now? Because I had that a bunch as well.
Yeah, I think part of what it was for you might be different because you had to spend, I think, more time making your levels than we did. Obviously, we had lots of procedural generation, so in general, it kind of felt like every day the game was improving in some way. It was more like, is it actually ever going to improve to the point it's good? But I can totally see where you're coming from, where it's like you're working on levels and you're working on this kind of, and you've got all these voice lines, you've got all this stuff that from a moment's gameplay, it's not going to look any different. And yeah, I could totally sympathize with that struggle. And I think with our next game that we're actually going to make the levels for, I will experience that far more than I did with Archvale. But yeah, luckily we never really got that feeling. I know the devlogs are actually quite nice to go back and look at, because even like the very last devlog I did, the game looks totally different from it now.
When you started the project, did you look at other games that were out there that were kind of similar, like Nuclear Throne? And
yeah, I mean, I think so. Really, if you look back on our YouTube channel, we've been me and Fops together have been making basically the same game for about 10 years, just kind of making another bullet hell top-down shooter over and over and over again. So, and over time, of course, I've played more and more bullet hell top-down shooters, and the influences of those keep sneaking into each one I make. So yeah, Nuclear Throne was a huge one with its melee combat, just because Nuclear Throne's melee combat is so fun. That was another thing that got us good engagement, was that sword swing animation, and it's still the main question I get from people is, how did you make the sword swing like that? And I don't even know. I've tried looking at the code and I can't work it out. But yeah, we weren't really trying to like explicitly simulate a game that already existed. It was just like, we knew we wanted a bullet hell game that wasn't a roguelike. That was the main thing we wanted to make. And yeah, so we'd just been making that over and over. And yeah, influences kept creeping in from loads of places. In the end, we have stuff from Hollow Knight, we've got stuff from Terraria, we've got stuff just from games that we love. We just kind of integrated random bits and kind of hoped that they'd work together.
I was kind of fascinated by that, because when you first look at screenshots and gameplay, I was very much like, okay, these are like procedurally generated level, probably some kind of roguelike. Yeah. And then I was very irritated, I can almost say, or positively surprised by this progression system, because it's a lot different than what you're used to. And I feel like that's what sets you apart from all of these other bullet hell games that are kind of like that. So
yeah, I mean,
I feel like you found a pretty cool niche there.
Well, that's the thing, right? Yeah. It's like all these games are roguelikes, and it's to the point where we were getting comments underneath our trailers like, oh no, not another pixel art roguelike. It's like, it's not a roguelike, come on. And it's just, you just assume it is because of, you know, what the gameplay looks like. It's like, you see bullet hell, you see pixel art, you see it's an indie game, it's like, this is a roguelike then. And it's
Yeah, for sure. You see items, you see all of the stuff. It all points in that direction.
Yeah,
it's a roguelike.
It was something we tried to talk with our publisher about. Like, we want to try and make it very clear that this is not a roguelike. And of course, we still have elements of procedural generation where the overworld map is procedurally generated, but it's still got this rigid progression. And we kind of wanted to communicate, like, don't expect, you know, a super intricate handmade world, but also don't expect a roguelike. And it was very, very difficult to get those expectations set. And we still get people that play the game and say, I thought this was going to be a roguelike and it wasn't. But they're generally quite happy to see it wasn't, because there's a lot of roguelikes around now. So I think sometimes just something that's a bit different from that, even though it's the same gameplay. I think people appreciate that.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like the progression system is much more pleasant this way.
Yeah.
Especially for people like me who don't have a lot of time. I appreciate it very much that I can actually progress through the game a bit more and don't have to start completely from scratch every single time I play. So I really like that. But I totally understand what you're saying. When making games, you very often run into these weird expectation management problems where you make something really cool or something really unique and people just don't understand what it is, or it's very hard to communicate what it is.
Yeah.
So that is a surprisingly big challenge you have to tackle as a game developer.
It is, yeah.
I didn't really think about just expectation management. It's really weird. So Fops was the artist of the game, basically, and you took care of all of the coding and game design, or how did you kind of split the workload there?
Yeah, so Fops did the art, he did the designs of things. Like, I'd basically just say to him, yeah, I need an enemy or I need a boss, and he'd kind of pitch an idea, and it was like, yeah, go for it, just do it, and I'll try and work out some stuff that works with it. He also gave feedback all the time he was playing the game, so we kind of worked together on the design. We basically argued over every part of the game. Like, we had very, very long Steam discussions trying to work out, I think it should be like this, and he'd think, I want it to be like that, and we had to argue a lot. But I think it was for the best that we kind of argued about things, because, you know, in retrospect, I think both of us had these ideas that we argued for, which were actually really bad ideas.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like having somebody to argue with is almost like a built-in quality check, whereas if your idea can't win the argument because it's just too stupid, then probably shouldn't be in the game.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so you kind of split the design decisions, and then you more like coding and he more on the art side.
That's right, yeah.
And for your visual development, is there like a specific way you approach this? Like, did you, or was it just like Fops made the first sprite and then the rest followed in the same style? Or like, what was the thought process behind the visual development?
I think in general, Fops has always had his fairly similar art style that he's always done for all of our games. And it's just kind of slowly improved. I know during development, like, Fops would send me a thing and I'd be like, yeah, perfect, that's good. And then over time, he would keep sending me new versions of those things. He's like, I don't like that anymore, here's a new version. And I would just put it in. I was pretty happy with Fops to kind of just run with whatever he was thinking. And yeah, clearly he was improving as the game went on, as was I, at, you know, the programming side of things. And yeah, so as the game went on, he got better and better at making art, and he'd go back over the bits that he made before and kind of polish them up. But in general, the aesthetic was always the same. You can look at the first devlogs and you'll see the sprites are still really, really similar. Like the changes were just like minor lighting tweaks to things and stuff like that. But yeah, the aesthetic was pretty set in stone from the start. Fops has a pretty iconic art style, I think, and it's not like a particularly unique art style. I just think he pulls off this fairly, I don't want to say generic pixel art, but it's like, you know, if you get what I mean, it's kind of just 16-bitty pixel arty look, but he does it very well. He has a very polished look to it, and yeah, that's his aesthetic.
Yeah, I think that describes it well. Yeah. It's a very stereotypical pixel art look, but it's really well executed. For sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, did you use the tweens for the squash and stretch as well?
We did, yeah. So an awful lot of the squash and stretch and the same with like flashes and things that we do, they last like a very, very short amount of time. So like 2 to 5 frames. We have squash and stretches that are like very, very minor and you almost can't see them. For the enemies, when they get hit, there's squash and stretch on them. And for that's quite a quick one that we used tween library for, but I think we mostly went with linear animations for that. But the slimes, for example, when they squash down, that was using a kind of in-out squashy tween on almost everything. And in fact, almost every single enemy, when they change pose, so as an example, you've got like a guy with a sword, when he snaps to a position where the sword's up here and he's about to swipe it, we will literally just do a kind of squashy like this as he changes that stance. So yeah, we do a lot with the tween libraries there, and almost always we're using this one that the graph is like this, where it kind of comes back at the very top to give it that kind of pump out and go back in a bit. And yeah, that is literally everywhere. I think more than half the enemies do that.
I see, and that's also a really smart way, I feel like, to save yourself a bit of work with the actual animations, because you don't have to create as many animation frames if you're just without code-based animations, you can create them kind of quickly.
Yes, it's much quicker. And yeah, there were times where, you know, it wasn't like I thought, yeah, this is the aesthetic we should go for this enemy, but it was like, yeah, there's not enough frames here, it just looks weird. Let's just try adding this squash and stretch, and suddenly, yeah, it looks really good. So it was a nice cheat to just kind of make things look nicer without needing to animate loads of extra frames. And this is a GameMaker related thing, but if you've ever worked on a really big GameMaker project, you'll know that when you start getting a lot of sprites, your compile times really go up, because the texture pages, you get more and more texture pages, and the waiting times for those texture pages can be crazy. So in a way, saving on texture page real estate with these animations in code is also a really good idea.
That's something I haven't even considered. Yeah, that makes sense.
Did you not encounter the texture page stuff with Will You Snell before?
I mean, I sorted everything onto nice texture pages, and now I'm down to something like 20 to 30 draw calls per level, which is that's just awesome. Batching works so well in GameMaker.
Yes.
I'm really happy about it. Just works out of the box.
Did you ever get to a point where your compile times were really long with the
the
texture tools? Yeah,
it takes a while. I don't know. I've kind of gotten used to it. When you hit play, you're just chilling for 30 seconds or something before,
before
anything happens.
30 seconds. That would be lovely if I had 30 seconds to wait. We got to a point at the end of the development where it's about 8 minutes that we had to wait for the game to compile. So it became necessary to use tools like GM Live to even work on the game. That was painful to deal with.
How did you go about the UI development in general? Because I feel like the UI looks very nice and polished, just like the rest of the game. Like all of the UI has like these little animations. Well, like everything I said about the art of the game applies to the UI as well, basically.
Yeah, I mean, the UI is something that I'm a bit less happy with in general. I think we could have done a better job with the UI. But yeah, the UI was different in that because of how difficult it is to make UI, I made a skeleton first. I would put everything in the place it was meant to be. We would sketch it out, then I'd implement it in code. And I wrote this pretty complicated UI system that would kind of... it almost worked a bit like HTML, where you would kind of say an element goes here, an element goes here, and then if you put another element in, it would wrap it round. So you could kind of add padding, and it would move stuff to the next layer and things like that. So yeah, we wrote a very complicated UI system, and then I made for each component that it would track when it was first focused on and left. So the buttons could kind of shift around when you mouse over them and things like that. Yeah, it was... Yeah, the UI I don't think we did an amazing job with, but we still made sure when you mouse over a thing, it kind of wobbles around. And yeah, it's all tween. It's all tweening. It's just, you mouse
Okay.
over it, the scale of the icon goes up and bounces back. It's like everything is just mouse over, bounce the sprite. That's basically all we did with the UI. But I think it worked. I think that was fairly effective.
I mean, it just feels like it all comes together so well, if you know what I mean. Like some games, the graphics look really good, and then they have garbage UI. And
oh yeah,
maybe in your case, the fact that you had an artist working on the project probably helped quite a bit.
It did help a lot. We actually worked together quite a lot on the UI sprites. It was a bit less one-sided there. We kind of passed back and forth on the UI. But yeah, we had a lot of inspiration from games like Terraria and Minecraft, and we weren't trying to innovate in that sense. Our inventory looks very similar to Minecraft and Terraria. We were just kind of trying to think, how can we make it look a bit more like our game, and make all the things bounce around. That was the key.
Okay, so you basically spent the majority of your time just grinding out content and creating this great progression system around your gameplay, basically.
Yeah, there was a lot of iteration with mechanics and stuff. Like, there's a lot of stuff in the devlogs that just didn't get in. We had a farming system and a base building system, which just we didn't. And we built them fully, like they were entirely functional. And obviously I put a lot of juice in them as well. So this is one time where juicing stuff up was a bad idea. But yeah, they just didn't make the cut in the end because they just didn't quite feel right. We spent a lot of time trying to work out exactly what Archvale was. Like we started off thinking, is this Terraria where, you've got a completely randomly generated world and you go to this biome to find this item and then you take it to this place and you do this with it? Or is it like Legend of Zelda where you kind of progress through areas? Is it like a Metroidvania? And it was like, that was what took the time, just trying to find the identity of the game, which I'm sure some people would say you should know that from the get-go, but I don't work like that. I literally can't do that. If I have a plan, I won't stick to it. I just need to feel things out and make stuff as I go, and I work better that way. So that was what took the time, was just working out how everything was going to work.
Oftentimes you don't really know how things are going to feel when you think or when you concept them on paper. You really have to kind of play them to see if they work. That's why textbook approach is usually to prototype these things. But I also get that, especially these really big long-term motivation systems like farming and so on, it's not something you can really make a quick prototype for or anything.
Yeah, because to get a feel for how it works, you need to have the prototype for, well, how long is it between each farming session? How are you getting the materials to do the farming? It's like, yeah, you can test the farming on its own, but it's like, well, this isn't what it will be in the game, because you're collecting the materials by playing the game, coming back to the farm, doing some bits, and prototyping that as a system in a game that's a big load of systems is very difficult to like properly gauge if it's any good.
Yeah, so you just decided to build it and then scrapped it.
Yes.
I mean, in a way, I guess that makes sense, yeah. What did you do if you built your project for 8 minutes and then it has an error message? You're like,
that was a sad moment when that happened. Luckily, I think GameMaker does the codey bits first. But yeah, no, you're right. If it crashes once it starts up, oh my god. And sometimes it was like I just did the debug command wrong, and I didn't want to fix the fact that the debug command would crash it. So it's like, okay, this time I remember not to do that. I run it and I walk away and I come back, immediately do the same thing, and it crashes again. And it's like, oh my god. Yeah, the
excited to find out if this will make it into the final edit. We'll see.
I mean, I don't quite understand why it is that you can't just hit the run button and it doesn't make it again if it detects no changes. Like, why does it need to make the executable again if you haven't changed anything in the source? But okay.
Oh well, here's some ideas for feature requests. We would like please faster building. Yes, that would be nice.
Yes, please.
Yeah. How do you think this project has changed you, and what do you say would you do differently next time?
I'm interested in trying to plan more than I did for Archvale. I think this time around, whilst I agree that it's nice to be flexible and kind of be available to change bits like we did in Archvale, I think it would be nice to go into this project with a pretty good idea of what I want it to be, which we've started the next project and I'm doing that. So that was one big thing I learned from Archvale, where, you know, we're working on it so long and what it is kind of keeps changing. So I think it's good to be able to adapt and change as things come. But yeah, having some kind of vision from the very beginning that we stick to is probably a good idea. So that's one massive thing.
How do you want to go about developing that vision? Do you plan on doing some prototyping, or will you just design stuff on paper? Like, how do you go about coming up with your concept?
When it comes to, the main thing we want to do here is make a world. Like make the levels by hand and have a kind of interconnected world, and that will definitely be a pen and paper thing. With the dungeons in Archvale, I did them all on pen and paper as well. I sketched them all out, trying to work out where the connections would be and stuff. Yeah, pen and paper is very nice for working out these kind of like the structure of things. And we made multiple design documents during Archvale, but we just kind of never conformed to them too strongly. So I'm not too sure design documents work for me. I think they're probably pretty good if you're working with like a massive team and they all need to understand it. But I think I prefer to keep it in my brain.
So for your next game, will you sort of stick to a similar formula where you make something where you know it works, not reinventing the wheel and just putting a little spin on it and polishing it up really well?
That's exactly what I want to do. The kind of games... I'm making the games that I wish I could play, and it's like... I already like the systems, I just wish they were put together in this way, and it's like, okay, well, let's see if I can put it together in this way, and if it works. So yeah, that's what I want to do, and that's probably how I'm going to keep making games. Yeah,
then in that case, I feel like your approach makes a lot of sense, because you don't really need to do a lot of prototyping in that case, because you already have all of these case studies of other games where you can clearly see that the game system that you're trying to do works. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Last question: why should people play your game, and where can they find your game, and where can they find you?
Archvale is kind of just like a massive amalgamation of all the games I really like. And people might also like those games. And so if you like things like Enter the Gungeon and Hollow Knight and Terraria and those kind of games, you might like Archvale. And it's on Steam, it's on Switch, and it's on Xbox Game Pass as well. So you can find it on all those places. And you can find me on Twitter @_IDoZ, or you can go to my YouTube channel, which is just called IDoZ, and I'll be posting devlogs for the new project sometime soon.
Yes. As soon as it looks super polished and like the finished game, we're gonna... Awesome. What I would say is the reason you should play Archvale is because it's basically like one of those classical roguelike bullet hell games, but it has a much more pleasant progression system, in my opinion. So if you like those kind of games but are frustrated by losing your progress every time you die, then try out Archvale. It's pretty nice.
It's a good call.
Yeah. You can find IDoZ on YouTube. He has a YouTube channel. You can find his game Archvale on Steam. Highly recommend you check it out. If you want to start making games, there's no better tool than GameMaker. Click the link in the description and get started now. My name is Jonas Tyroller and I'll be guest posting on the GameMaker YouTube channel every once in a while now, so make sure to subscribe. Thanks again to GameMaker for making this possible, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.